All right, everybody, welcome. Thanks for coming to our software engineering employer panel. We have with us esteemed center alumni Michael Fryer and Cyrus C. Is that close?
She, yeah.
Here to talk to you guys about their career trajectory since leaving center, how they ended up where they are, what software engineering could be about, what it's all about, what options could be out there. So at this point, I will turn it over to you guys. Michael, Cyrus, talk to us about who you are, introduce yourselves, where you're working, some places that you've worked in the past, how you got to where you are since center, all that stuff. And then as you guys have questions like throughout, just feel free to interject. We don't have to wait for a certain question and answer period at the end. So whenever you have questions, feel free to ask.
Sorry, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I'll just give a brief overview of my career so far. So I'm Cyrus. I graduated from Center in the winter of 2014. Graduating year 2015. I was a philosophy and computer science double major. First job, worked at a big financial company, Fidelity Investments in North Carolina, and then spent a little bit of time at a healthcare startup. And those first two jobs, kind of just learning what software engineering was about. Ended up moving out west to California to work at Meta, Facebook, as a data engineer in around 2017. And then since then, I've been working in a mix of big tech companies and startups. I spent some time at Uber and Snap, working on similar kind of data and backend infrastructure teams. And then now I'm a senior software engineer at an AI startup called Scale AI in San Francisco. And here, I've been here just over 2 years working on various microservices related to platform and infrastructure cost. Yeah.
I'm Michael. I majored in economics at Center. I never took a CS class. I didn't think I was going to be a software engineer. I did a one-year master's degree after graduating as a Rotary Scholar in international development. And then I worked for a group of development economists as a research fellow. And then rather than doing a PhD in economics, I decided to pivot to what I thought was going to be data science. And I got a job with a startup as a quantitative social scientist. And then I followed the opportunities and mentorship that was available there and became first a data engineer and then a software engineer. And then we were acquired by a company that's based in Brazil named Nubank. And I've been working for the past 2.5 years now as a software engineer at Nubank, mostly on product teams. So building out products to help customers manage their financial lives.
So talk to us about your time at Center and what sorts of things you did at Center to kind of help you get to where you are. What were some things that were important to help you get to where you are now?
Yeah, I guess for me, the computer science classes certainly helped, just in teaching kind of the fundamentals. And then the kind of the general ed classes and philosophy actually helped quite a bit in terms of writing and critical thinking. I think as you get more senior in software engineering, it's more and more important to be able to communicate effectively, and to be able to write, documents, design docs, and those sorts of things. At Center, I also did a software engineering internship. That definitely helped in terms of having some real world experience with software engineering. And then also did a couple of like side projects. I think that also helps establish to employers that you're familiar with engineering as at like scale and like version control, kind of production systems and so on. So
I definitely would echo what Cyrus said in that writing is something that I view as a relative strength of mine. And I know, some of the most senior engineers in my company talk about like sometimes I feel like I'm a staff Google Docs engineer, right? That like most of what I do is trying to think about how do I communicate these ideas around architecture or design, or why should we be making this change? And as people ask about things like, oh, are you concerned about advances in AI challenging, job security for software engineers, given that Copilot can, create, you can give it a prompt and then it can like generate the code. And what like things like Copilot are good at is when you're like, okay, here is the problem I want to solve. I just don't know the syntax for it. Like AI is very good at that. But most of my work as a software engineer has not been problems where it's like I don't know the syntax. The problem is like what is it that I need to solve? What's the best way to think about this problem, to structure it? And something where, the just being able to get to a point where you could write a prompt for, okay, here's the kind of pseudo code that I want to express, would be success. So I think, even not taking computer science classes, the courses I had where I was forced to, think about, in an economics context, thinking about trade-offs and because a lot of engineering is about trade-offs, right? Is it worth the cost to get, whatever benefits in terms of performance? Is it better for like balancing user experience versus business needs? So those economics frameworks also helped a lot. And then also like Cyrus, the last internship I did between my junior and senior years was with the startup that I then came back to when I made my pivot. Although at the time that I was doing an internship, I wasn't doing technical work. I was doing more user research and user experience. But then I reached back out to them and got a technical role at them when I made my pivot.
yeah, I also want to echo what Michael said about writing. I think one way to think about it is code is just kind of another tool to solve problems at scale to have leverage. It's not the only tool. Writing is another way to reach, a large audience, to like spread ideas and to have leverage and influence. And so I think that like problem solving skill is something that doesn't depend on specific tools or specific syntax. It's something you can develop, in multiple ways. So
And I know we saw two hands go up, so I want to get to those. But that idea of leverage, right? That like code gives you leverage because you write it once and then it's executed multiple times. But writing is very similar. Like the number of people who read what you write is much greater than, like who writes it. So it's also a good way to get leverage. And then, yeah, so we saw hands. Definitely interested in questions that y'all have.
Hello, my name is Diego Sig. I'm an international student from Guatemala, and I have a question from Cyrus. You have been in several companies, and I was wondering, do you recommend transitioning from companies really often? Is something that you enjoy, or why did you do it?
yeah. Yeah, I have worked at a variety of tech companies. I wouldn't say I recommend it just for the sake of doing it. I know lots of successful, software engineers that have stayed at the same company. I think I did it for various reasons. Often there was like a compelling reason at the newer company. For example, I wanted to make the switch from data engineering to software engineering. And so as I was considering like an internal transfer within Facebook, I had to go through interviews anyway. So I took the opportunity to brush up on kind of interviewing skills and interviewed elsewhere. I think in general, when I was considering leaving, I consider it sort of as a push versus pull model, whether there are reasons in my current job that were pushing me to leave or whether new offers had compelling factors that pulled me in that direction. So I think that's one framework I used. I think in general, I wouldn't recommend one way or the other. It's more about being deliberate and kind of owning your own career, kind of thinking about what you want to do in a few years and how your current job or whether other opportunities are more suited for you.
Hi, my name is like Kamal. I'm from Tajikistan. I just had a question. What do you think about like a current job and internship market like in software engineering? Like is it gonna be getting worse and worse or like how what do you think about the job market? I look right now.
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Have similar question.
Yeah.
Okay. I have also similar question, guys. I also wanted to say hi to both of you. And Cyrus, I have watched your video with Zoma Tech multiple times. Just wanted to mention that. So the question is and my questions are same. So with all the changes in AI and development in AI, what do you guys think the software engineering jobs and applications and software engineering, the development will change over time? And how do you think we should accomplish certain things working with AI or something like that?
So it sounds like a two-part question. Number one, what about the job market? What's the job outlook for software engineering? But then in addition to, the introduction of AI, how does AI change things? Does it change things? What should they be doing in terms of AI, in terms of what they should be learning now in order to secure a job in the future?
Right. Yeah, I guess that's a great question. I think there's sort of two ways to look at it. One, at a higher level, I think AI is a very powerful tool, but I think it's still kind of another tool that we have. And I think it's kind of a democratizing tool. So as with code and with writing, any kind of edge you have in terms of being able to use that tool more effectively or more efficiently is certainly going to be like beneficial. I think being familiar with how AI works will certainly help. But in terms of like specific job outlooks for software engineering, I think it'll definitely impact roles where it's kind of like what Michael said, where the problems are very clearly defined and you just have to kind of feed a specific prompt to get an implementation. But I think a lot of software engineering is a lot messier and more abstract. And for those roles, AI is definitely not anytime soon going to be able to automate those opportunities away. So I think being both aware of these technologies and like being able to use them effectively is going to help. And then even before AI, I think being able to like take ownership of your career, seek out opportunities as they come, and staying aware of new technologies will help.
And I think what I would add to that is when you're looking at different opportunities, what for me I've learned to weight really heavily is like, what is the culture like? What are the people like? And weight a little less the particular technology, because tech changes really fast. So like the startup that I worked at when I was doing my pivot, this was 2019, and they were running Ruby on Rails, which was like what startups chose when that startup was founded, but was like not what, like if I were at a newer startup, they probably would have been using like Python. But like Ruby was what it was like written in, and the lessons I learned around just engineering fundamentals, thinking like an engineer, were like more valuable than anything I learned about the syntax of that particular language. And in fact, I could imagine being in an organization that was using like whatever the like tech of the moment was, but had like a toxic culture, and I wouldn't have had as many opportunities to learn and grow. And likewise, in my current company, we use a language that is pretty niche. It's a Lisp dialect called Clojure. But the thing that's most important about that choice was not anything related to the benefits of that particular functional programming language. It was that it created a culture where you're filtering for people who are willing to say, I'm okay working in a language that like I don't know before. So you're not filtering for people who are coming in saying like I'm an expert in this. You're filtering for people coming in saying like, hey, I want to be open to learning something new. And so what I would say is rather than trying to like plan out like, okay, I need to learn how like this particular like ML algorithm or this particular thing about like AI right now, like that stuff moves so fast that like if you have an opportunity to do it, like go for it, definitely. But don't use that as like a filter to restrict other potential opportunities where you're like building up those fundamental skills and getting opportunities for mentorship and learning and growth. That will just be really flexible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I mentioned pull factors in terms of job search. I think one of those factors that weighted heavily was culture and specifically learning and growth potential. I think especially early in your career, growth and learning is one of those things that can compound like money. And so if you can have a good kind of learning rate and be able to like soak up knowledge and skills quickly, that makes a big impact later on. And that can easily be more important than more near-term things like a really hot technology or even higher compensation. So that's one of those things that I think matters a lot when you think of your career as like an overall trajectory.
So from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, software engineering is expected to grow by about 25% from 2022 to 2032, which is much faster than your average occupation. So the jobs will be out there for quite some time. Yes, sir.
Hello, Diego again. I have a question for both of you. I was wondering, what are those skills that you acquire or you develop to go from junior positions to senior positions?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it follows a similar theme of leverage and ownership. I think when you are an entry-level software engineer, like a new grad, your area of ownership is kind of like an individual feature or a small part of a project or app. And so that's where you have leverage and that's where you have ownership. And then as you become more senior, that area of your kind of domain expands. You should try to expand it where you need to become more aware of priorities outside of just the individual app, maybe your team's priorities, or as you get more senior, your organization's priorities. And as you get more senior, your solutions have to kind of encompass that entire domain. So you need to work with more cross-functional stakeholders. You need to consider like prior solutions, and maybe the problem you're solving isn't even well defined. So you need to figure out what the problem even is and try to think of solutions. And so the skills involved there, there's a variety, but it's a lot of just being able to keep learning, talk to people, communicate, and be able to like explore and investigate the possible problems or solutions. So
Yeah, I would definitely say something similar in terms of it's just expanding scope that when you start and like your challenge is like you're given a task that like hopefully is like well defined, but it's your job to figure out like, okay, how do I like actually write the code to like make this work? And then like the next level up is like creating like you're given like a a specification that's like, okay, here's like a kind of product like need. How do I like create the task that like defines like, what needs to be coded? And then like the next level up from that is you're like actually influencing the roadmap itself of, okay, what is an engineering perspective on what the product feature should be, balancing both like user needs and your input on, okay, does this complexity seem doable? Does it seem worthwhile? So it's just kind of continually moving up. And the fun thing is, as you move up, you then get opportunities to mentor people who are like coming down below, right? So you get to say like, okay, I could probably do that myself, but I'm going to leave, space for someone else for whom it's like it's a challenge for them to just like do the implementation, and I get to coach them and watch them grow. And then there are people who are now helping me on the parts that are new for me, which is that part of mapping out the more abstract thing. So yeah, as Cyrus said, it's just like expanding scope, going from concrete to abstract usually.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, in terms of like a specific skill or mindset, I think being able to absorb large amount of information and kind of take away conclusions or new areas of exploration is really important. And I think like part of that is having this sense of curiosity. If you're a new grad engineer and you're in meetings and people are talking about like a new initiative or various acronyms are flying around, having this like curiosity about what those are, about like maybe there's a better way to achieve this task than the one I was given. That's something that I think would serve you really well, because then you're thinking beyond just your current scope. You're kind of setting yourself up for like the next level. So yeah.
A kind of specific thing on that is just don't be afraid to ask, find a mentor, right? Like people are usually very happy to like help. And so, if it's something where that's like reaching out to someone to do pair programming or reaching out to someone to join your whiteboarding sessions, I think sometimes I've had in my career like a fear of like, oh, like this person's more senior than I am. Like, am I wasting their time? Like, are they getting anything out of this? I think there's two ways of thinking about it. I think often people are willing to just have a kind of like paying it forward of like, hey, someone else did the same thing for me, so I'll do it for you. But then the other thing that I've learned not discount is that people really do get enjoyment out of having someone who's more junior, who's like eager to learn, who's receptive, who's grateful, and that they actually do get something out of that. It's not just like a take relationship.
So Cyrus, you mentioned earlier in your introduction that you kind of worked on some special projects while you were at Center to kind of help you build some skills. What did you do to acquire those projects or find out what those projects were? How did you go about seeking those out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something that I also didn't know how to go about when I was a center. I think I remember like Googling a list of side projects, Reddit or something back then. I think a piece of advice I got a lot is try to solve something that's like an actual issue for yourself. I think I wrote like a to-do list manager or something. It's a piece of advice that startup founders get too. You'll be a lot more invested in creating something if it's addressing a pain point that you yourself have. So that's kind of where I would go about in terms of side projects. Just try to write something that addresses something you want yourself or some issue or nit that you have. And then kind of go along the journey and see where it takes you. I think a couple of my side projects were also influenced from things we did in class, kind of just taking another step or exploring along those directions. So
Michael, question for you. So you started off, you were an economics major, you were headed down that path. What changed? What made you make the shift from economics to software?
Yeah, good question. I think part of it was, as I mentioned, like a little bit of culture. So there in the part of academia that I was, I noticed that I felt what Carol Dweck calls like a fixed mindset was like really common in like academic economics. The sense of like the ideal economist is like John Nash in A Beautiful Mind, who's just like solving equations in his head. It's like the genius. And so for me, it felt like I was just kind of trying to prove to others that like I was smart enough to do it. And in software engineering, there's a much longer tradition of people who are self-taught, people who, there's like the memes of just like, there's like the O'Reilly books about, like essential, programming essentials or whatever. And then there's like the satirical covers that's like essential, like Googling Stack Overflow answers, right? And this idea that like, hey, I remember when like, I was new and like I didn't know how to do this stuff. It's not, you know, it's not obvious that if you want to, you can figure it out. So that that kind of culture of like a growth mindset of like, hey, it doesn't matter where you started, like you can learn and get better. As opposed to a mindset that I saw that was like very focused on like credentials, like where did you do your undergrad? Where are you going to do your PhD? Where did you do your postdoc? What department are you in? And all of that was like very hierarchical. Like as soon as you say like, oh, I'm a professor at X institution, people have in their heads like a kind of ranking. Whereas in tech, you can work at a startup that nobody's ever heard of, and that's perfectly respectable because who knows, like that could be the next big thing. So in part of that, you know, again is unique to me. Like it might be idiosyncratic. So not necessarily. I have friends who did the economics PhD route, and it was a good choice for them. But I think you know, when I was doing a kind of energy audit of like what gives me energy, what am I excited to do, when I was writing a like application for a National Science Foundation like fellowship for like econ grad school, I just wasn't feeling like really energized by it. But when I was solving little programs in Python for like a side project that I'd started, I was like, wow, I just like I get into a flow when I'm doing this. The feedback loops feel like they're really fast. You know, in academia, you like work on a project for your dissertation thesis for like 5 years, and then like only when you kind of get your data in and get the final results and like go on the job market, you have a sense of like, okay, how did this go? Whereas, you know, in programming, the feedback loops tend to be much faster. Certainly there's some things that take a while to get feedback about like, okay, how did this like decision scale up? But in general, I found the feedback loops were faster. And so that was something else that pulled me in that direction. And also it helped that I think, you know, I was not trying to what someone once called like maximize my profit function of like doing the thing that earned the most. But the fact that like grad school is just like yeah, grad school like even in econ, you're doing like a lot of deferring like earnings for like later in life. And you have to be willing, like if you want to kind of play the game of just say like I'm going to apply to 20 PhD programs and then I'll go to whatever the highest ranked one I get into is. And at that time, I was trying to balance. I was married, and so I was thinking about, well, I don't actually think that I could, you know, it wouldn't be best for my wife to just say like, hey, follow me to whatever the like city is that has like the highest ranked program, and to be able to say, okay, hey, let's make a decision where we're able to choose an area we both want to go to. You know, we also moved out to the Bay Area, and that also helped. That like in software, I think you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of where you go than in academia.
So one question, I think most specifically for Cyrus. You are currently physically in the San Francisco Bay Area at a machine learning startup, right?
Yes, yeah.
So what is your understanding of how powerful the benefits to being physically in San Francisco if you are at a machine learning startup are at this point in time? Because that is literally what I'm considering doing in like 6 months. I'm trying to figure out if the San Francisco location aspect is relevant or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me it might be a bit different because I think I was always interested in moving out west and kind of seeing what California was about. I grew up in a kind of a small city in the Midwest. But I do think there are a lot of benefits to being kind of in the heart of tech, where you can go to like meetups, you can do a lot of networking. There's a high density of tech companies. But I think it's also what you make of it. I think if you move out here and you kind of just work at like a big tech company, you don't do any networking or go to any of these other events, it's not really it's not that like impactful. And on the flip side of things, if you're working remote, in a much lower cost of living area, that definitely has the benefits too. You can definitely still network, virtually, or if you go into headquarters, the office once in a while. So I think it is an advantage, but it's not something I would, like uproot my life to do unless it's something I was already like interested in. So
Well, maybe complement that I when I made my pivot, I moved from Kentucky to the Bay Area. We lived in San Francisco for a year. And at the time, getting that job, a condition of the job that I got, that was my first job, was being in person. So it enabled that switch. And there were, like Cyrus said, I think it helped that I had also wanted to go towards the Bay Area. My wife and I were looking to move, and I suspected that I would like the kind of culture of the Bay Area, where if you like doing outdoors things, so for me that became cycling. I now spend a lot of time biking. So I think the fact that I wasn't just moving for work, that there were, I sometimes say like I moved to the Bay Area because I got a job, but I also got a job here because I wanted to move to the Bay Area. That it worked well for me, but I'm now about to, in April, move back to Kentucky, to be closer to my parents and my wife's parents. That's enabled by the fact that I'm now working remotely. So the company I work for is based in Brazil. I travel there about 4 times a year. And as I thought about that change, the career maximizing thing to do would probably be to stay in the Bay Area. But the optimizing thing to do, balancing across family needs and career needs, it felt like, okay, yeah, I can make this work if I move back. So similar to what Cyrus said, I think if you want to do it, like go for it. I think there's some kind of punching down on like San Francisco that you get in the news. But I have a lot of love for the city. I think if you're interested in it, like I definitely wouldn't discourage you from doing it. But if you really are like, I don't know that this is right for me, and I just feel like I'd like have to do it even though I don't want to, I wouldn't say that that's the only way. As as Cyrus said, like Cyrus, you had some experience in Durham. The company that I worked for, their first kind of US acquisition was a group of like world-class engineers who are based out of Durham. There are lots of places in the US, and as is now my case, like remote options. So it's not the only path.
So my question is about the application to software engineering jobs and internships. So there are a lot of applicants right now, thousands of applicants, and they're just going to the portal, applying without knowing anyone in the company, or even if we know, it's hard to get reached to the recruiter and they don't reach back to us and all those things. So what do you guys think would be the best approach for us to reach out, or how do you guys think we could stand out from other applicants while applying to new jobs or software engineering jobs?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I don't think there are any like easy, non-cliched answers here. I mean, of course, networking, trying to get referrals, like informational interviews, those are like really helpful. I think for me, I think that was one of the main reasons. I spent a couple of years in North Carolina before going out to California. It is hard to get kind of like a personal connection out west when you don't really know anyone in any of these big tech companies. But I will say that like I think interviewing for some of the bigger tech companies is actually easier than interviewing for like smaller tech companies. Often these big tech companies will cast a pretty wide net on LinkedIn or other places, and they often have really established hiring pipelines. So I remember I got like a recruiting email from Amazon like a year out of college, and I hadn't really applied that widely, or I didn't really have like an impressive LinkedIn or anything. But they're kind of, they're a really big company. They have lots of new grads every year. And so, one of those opportunities is pretty like feasible, I think, to come by. Aside from that, yeah, trying to look at your network, cold emailing people you have mutuals with might help. And then yeah, building up a portfolio, side projects, and kind of your experience will help too.
And then I think the other thing that might have been implicit in what Cyrus said is just be persistent. There are things I applied for where I didn't even get invited to the phone screen. There are things where I did the phone screen, then did the first tech screen and didn't make it past there. And there have been lots of things I applied for that I didn't get. So it's certainly not the case that yeah, everyone else but you has like a easy, straightforward path. I think for most people, it's there are lots of things that don't work out for everything that does work out. And I guess one last little thing on job searching is just in my experience, moments of transition subjectively feel a lot like the 3 months of job searching feels like it lasts forever, and then the first 12 months in a job just fly by. So I think when I was in one of the big kind of mindset shifts, grade school, high school, all the way through college, like everything is like very kind of regimented. And if you take like, if you like fall behind in terms of your schedule by like 6 months, it feels like, I'm just like way behind schedule. But then like careers are very long, life is long. So just yeah, trying to pass on that perspective about don't stress too much if things are taking a little longer than you thought.
So if we have follow-up questions, maybe we reach out to you to ask them.
Yeah, sure, definitely. I think Michael should be able to pass along my email, or you can find me on LinkedIn. But yeah, definitely happy to chat.
Yeah, same. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, or yeah, my email is just last name dot first name at Gmail. So
Time for another question or two. Anybody has one? Sir.
What are your perspectives on like alternative tech hubs in the United States? So beyond San Francisco, like is San Francisco a shining star in terms of cities that that have a conglomeration of tech, or places like Seattle, Boston, these minor places also you get a lot of these same experience. I mean, I know you haven't lived in them, but do you have any insight on that?
yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say most big tech companies have offices in at least New York and Seattle. I think those are pretty common office locations. And I have friends who've worked in like Austin, Texas, Raleigh, Durham, other places like in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I think there's going to be tech companies in almost every like major city. But yeah, the big ones are probably like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, like LA, New York, and Seattle. So
And yeah, I think what I would say is just think about like job availability is like one input into your like equation of like where do you want to move, right? So there is a big concentration of AI startups in San Francisco. If you wanted to do something that's more in like biotech, like Boston has like a relatively like strong, area for that. But yeah, as I said, Austin, Denver, Raleigh, Durham, there are all sorts of, and as I'm now in a company that has lots of remote people. There are people just like all over the country. So I think I wouldn't use it as one input, but don't limit yourself based just on that. There actually, yeah, like I know someone who's in Nashville now, who's like, Nashville being like a little closer, obviously, to center, who there's like a really good boot camp in Nashville, and they spin out people to work in companies in Nashville all the time. So definitely lots of options.
Any other questions? Cyrus, Michael, thank you guys so much for speaking to our students. We appreciate you greatly. If you would like to receive their contact information, I need you to make sure that you've signed in using the QR code. Also, we're recording the video, and so I will also, once we get it put on YouTube, I'll send you guys the link. That way you can refer back to it whenever you like. Please join me and thank you. Thanks again, guys.
Have a good one, y'all.
Thanks.